The Jewish people were building Jerusalem 3,000 years ago, and the Jewish people are building Jerusalem today.
مقابله با این رژیم ایستادن در برابر صهیونیست ها هم یک امر ملی است، هم یک امر اعتقادی و دینی و اسلامی است.
The founders humbly sought the wisdom and the blessing of divine providence. May we always live by that same trust, and may God continue to watch over the United States of America. God bless, and God bless America.
They said God was dead. But since the late 70s, religion is back on the battlefields and in politics. We no longer talk about the clash between ideologies, but of jihads against crusades, holy wars that are turned, as in the past, towards Jerusalem. To understand this religious revival, we go back 20 years to the fall of the Berlin Wall, when men began dreaming of peace and unity. The end of the Cold War raises new hopes, but does not end the wars that devastate the Middle East. For the oil reserves of the West are in the Middle East. Since the late 70s and the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the geostrategic wars that aim the control of its production are not conducted on behalf of ideologies, but in the name of God, among Christians as among Jews and among Muslims. The major players of these conflicts that, in the name of God, will engulf the Middle East for decades to come are already in place. The mass exodus of Jews from the Soviet Union to Israel contributes to harden the conflict with the Palestinians. The Israeli nationalist religious right and the Islamist movements push the conflict towards a clash between Jews and Muslims. In Afghanistan, the Soviet army withdraws and abandons the country in the hands of the jihad fighters, such as Massoud, who advocates a moderate Islam, but also bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, future ally of the Taliban's, theology students who claim an Islam of a new era. Without winners or losers, the Iran-Iraq war, called by historians the First Gulf War, just ended. But it will soon give birth to the Second Gulf War. In Iran, the Ayatollah Khomeini dies, but leaves behind an Islamic power that wants to transform the country into the new great power into the Middle East. And in Iraq, Saddam Hussein also dreams of transforming his country into a superpower, but he is in debt after 8 years of war. He then turns to his creditors, the Arab Gulf countries, mostly Sunni, who have lent him the millions of dollars needed for the war he waged against their common enemy, the Shiite Iran.
Saddam Hussein went back to his Kuwaiti and Saudi creditors and said, well, look, I was fighting your war, so the least you can do is to now forgive the debts. We'll call it even. And the Kuwaitis in particular said, no way. We loaned you the money. We want you to pay back. And Saddam Hussein decided that he would solve that problem.
Saddam Hussein takes justice into his own hands and invades Kuwait, who cannot resist. Victorious after 2 days, he annexes Kuwait with impunity. But how to understand that a war leader as experienced as Saddam Hussein invades without fear a country that provides oil to the West? because this act of aggression will trigger the Second Gulf War and embark the Middle East in a new round of violence.
This goes back to the famous conversation between our ambassador at the time and Saddam Hussein. Her instructions from Washington were incomplete. And she may have left Saddam with the wrong impression of how America would react.
A few days before the invasion of Kuwait, Saddam Hussein met April Glaspie, the US ambassador in Baghdad. The content of their conversation has since been made public. Here's what she told him. I admire your efforts to rebuild your country. I know you need funds. We have no opinion on a conflict between Arab countries such as the one regarding your border disagreements with Kuwait.
Certainly, she did not emphatically express U.S. opposition to military action. She did not do that. The question is whether or not she intended to give a green light to an invasion, or whether she just, I think, which is my view, I think she simply mishandled this interview. Nonetheless, I mean, if you were Saddam Hussein, you could certainly have interpreted the conversation as indicating that the United States was not going to object.
Did the United States set a trap for Saddam Hussein by creating the ideal excuse to rid them of their former ally that had become too ambitious? In 6 months, the United States organizes the response. By the fall of 1990, they set up a coalition of 34 countries, Western, Arab, and even countries of the former Soviet bloc. More than 900,000 men will be sent to the Gulf. A Vietnam veteran, a career soldier from father to son, Colonel Andrew Basovich, who has since become a professor of international relations, is mobilized at the time.
When Americans act, they will inevitably express their motives in idealistic terms. That action is about advancing the cause of liberty. That action is about promoting democracy or eliminating evil oppressors. I mean, when we choose to go after Saddam Hussein in Iraq, it's not by coincidence that Iraq is a major producer of oil.
It is also not a coincidence if on September the 11th, 1990, President George Bush defends a military intervention in Iraq and at the same time develops his vision of the world for the decades to come. A worldview that he baptizes the New World Order.
A new world order can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nations of the world, East and West, North and South, can prosper and live in harmony. A world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle. A world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice. A world where the strong respect the rights of the weak. Once again, Americans have stepped forward to share a tearful goodbye with their families before leaving for a strange and distant shore. Thank you, good night, and God bless the United States of America.
On est là face à des choses qui nous sont parfaitement incompréhensibles d'un point de vue européen. Pour nous, c'est l'un ou l'autre. Pour la religion civile américaine, c'est l'un et l'autre. Et c'est pour ça que cette religion civile américaine, elle veut façonner la mondialisation, parce qu'elle pense qu'elle a les clés de la paix mondiale, parce qu'elle a expérimenté dans le Nouveau Monde cette forme, finalement, de pacification des esprits en évitant les guerres de religion. Mais ce que l'Amérique a du mal à comprendre, c'est que ce modèle suppose une américanisation réelle des mentalités et donc ne peut qu'éveiller des résistances. Ça, c'est le paradoxe américain.
first act of the New World Order, the bombing of Baghdad, the Iraqi capital.
Not again! Those are human lives! Human lives! Children and elderly and women!
For many Iraqis, the bombing is not experienced as an aid provided by the powerful to the weakest. It is experienced as an humiliation, and its shockwave reverberates throughout the Muslim world.
Plus l'Amérique veut faire le bien, moins elle est reçue. Pourquoi? Parce que le Dieu de l'Amérique, c'est le Dieu américain. Les gens le perçoivent ainsi, et que les gens ont leur propre Dieu. La guerre des dieux n'est pas finie.
Kuwait is quickly liberated. Iraqi troops withdraw from Kuwait in late February 1991, setting fire to 732 Kuwaiti oil wells. A huge sabotage that causes one of the greatest environmental disasters of the Middle East. Saddam Hussein's response to the West. Does he want to say that for him, the engine of the new American world order is neither God, nor democracy, nor peace, but oil?
Saddam, once he realized he was in trouble, desperately tried to find ways to rally the Iraqi people and the rest of the Islamic world behind him. And he too invoked God, and now said that Iraq was fighting a great Islamic battle against a Western coalition of American, British, French, and other troops, and famously put the words, "There is no God but God," on the Iraqi flag, where it had never been before.
Like Khomeini during the war against Iraq, Saddam Hussein in turn exploits the Palestinian problem. To win the support of the majority of Muslims, he turns his missiles against Israel and sends his Scuds, a strategy that fails to rally the other Muslim countries to his cause, but that galvanizes his troops to resist the powerful US Army. America sends its 24th Mechanized Division to Baghdad. But despite the heavy losses inflicted on the Iraqis, the coalition forces stop at the gates of the capital. America accepts only a ceasefire, and Saddam remains in power. A tragedy for the Shiite population, one of Iraq's religious minorities that the coalition had successfully raised against Saddam Hussein and then abandoned. A bloody repression follows.
Saddam Hussein was able to survive. And people in Washington then faced the question of what was the appropriate response to this failure. It was a failure. It was not a victory. And the answer they came up with was one consistent with the Carter Doctrine of ratcheting up the U.S. military involvement and presence in the region.
Act 2 of the New World Order. To strengthen its control of the Middle East, the West uses the apparent failure. It imposes on Iraq the control of its airspace, and the US military installs a permanent base in Saudi Arabia, close to Mecca.
And clearly we failed to understand how offensive that was going to be, not simply to people in Saudi Arabia, but to Muslims elsewhere in the Islamic world. So we handed Osama bin Laden a great gift.
غائرة جدا في كل مكان، ولكن جراحنا اليوم في أعظم مقدساتنا، في البيت العتيق، في الكعبة المشرفة، في مسجد نبينا عليه الصلاة والسلام.
The continued presence of Western forces, especially in Saudi Arabia, became a rallying cry for the Islamists, for the jihadists. Al-Qaeda began now arguing that all three of Islam's holiest places were under foreign occupation. Mecca and Medina in the kingdom by American forces, and Jerusalem by Israeli forces in Palestine. And it was this argument that foreign occupation forces now were in control of all three places, all of the holy cities of Islam, that was very powerful in rallying support for al-Qaeda among a minority of Muslims, but a minority willing to commit suicide terrorism.
At the end of the Second Gulf War, the Middle East becomes the battlefield of a New World division. The New World Order is settling in, but walls rise up again. Not between the East and West, but between the North and the South. Between rich countries that seek to maintain their hegemony and countries seeking to develop. American conservatives no longer speak of a war of ideologies, but of a clash of civilizations. A confrontation between the so-called Judeo-Christian world and the so-called Arab-Muslim world. Jerusalem then becomes a symbolic center towards which the warmongers of the two worlds turn. The fall of the wall causes the emigration to Israel of more than 1 million Soviet Jews, the largest exodus since its creation in 1948. The settling of migrants in the occupied territories is experienced by the Arab population as a colonization. The Palestinians rebel. The first Intifada, the war of stones, intensifies. Faced with this uprising tension that encompasses all the West Bank, the Israeli government contacts General Itzhak Segev, who is familiar with the Muslim world, having been often on missions mainly in Iran. The Israeli Minister of Defense asks him to act as mediator with Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian leader.
Defense Minister was Arens. So he invited me to his office because we met in America, and he told me, we so much invest about you. Tomorrow you are Major General and you are responsible about all Palestinian. So I told him, okay, I will be pleased. What is the policy? And he told me, the policy is very simple. You must smile and annex. Smile and annex. I told him, Mr. Arens, this will not work. I will not do.
The formula smile and annex reflects the policies led by the nationalist right and the theories of religious Zionism which, since 1967 and the Six-Day War, gained influence at the expense of secular Zionism. Their dream, to build the Greater Israel, a country that would include all Holy Lands and extend well beyond the boundaries defined by the United Nations. Despite repeated treaties signed with Yasser Arafat for the creation of two states, Israel pushes its advantage and occupies more and more territories. The obstinate fight led by the Palestinian organizations does not prevent the West Bank shrinking.
Les Israéliens considèrent que leur ennemi principal, c'est la gauche palestinienne, le nationalisme palestinien, l'OLP, le Fatah, le Front populaire qui tenait le haut du pavé à Gaza. Arrive un cheikh religieux, un certain Ahmed Yassine, qui va voir les autorités militaires israéliennes et leur dit « Nous avons le même ennemi, je suis contre ces buveurs de whisky, je veux me consacrer à la religion et au social, laissez-moi faire, au moins aidez-moi. »
In order to weaken the Palestinian opposition and prevent the creation of a Palestinian state, Israel would in turn use political Islam. The Palestinian spiritual leader, Ahmed Yassine, is free to gradually take control of the mosques of Gaza, the social centers, clinics, sports centers, children's playgrounds. his influence grows in the Palestinian territories, in Gaza and the West Bank, and he founds the Hamas, fervor in Arabic, and he recruits.
مين بيكره السلام؟ مين هو في العالم اللي بيحبش السلام؟ أنا بقول لك إنه إحنا بنحب السلام أكتر منكم. إحنا بدنا السلام. أقول لك الحيوان بده السلام والطير بده السلام. لكن أنا كمان مرة بسأل سؤال: هل هناك سلام مع وجود احتلال على شعب وأرض؟ يا سلام يا احتلال. وإحنا من حقنا في كل الشرائع السماوية والدينية والقوانين العالمية أن ندافع عن أنفسنا أمام هذا الاحتلال.
Les Israéliens autorisent le Cheikh Yassine et son organisation à faire venir de l'étranger toutes les sommes qu'ils veulent. Les frères musulmans dans le golfe Persique, en Jordanie se mobilisent. On envoie beaucoup d'argent à Yassine, ce qui lui permet de développer encore son activité.
Hamas is not only a religious organization, it is also a political party and a paramilitary organization whose program is to establish the Islamic Republic of Palestine.
Il y a eu des Israéliens, des experts qui sont allés voir qu'est-ce qu'il y avait derrière, effectivement, la théologie des frères musulmans. C'était tout simplement, tôt ou tard, la destruction d'Israël.
The Islamist movement gains in popularity. The rise of power of the religious groups weakens the secular movement of Yasser Arafat. But haven't the Israeli authorities played with the fire?
Everything started in 79. Iran, the Iranian model, is the Iranian that after that support Hezbollah. And this is the model that support Hamas. So it's not come from the tail to the head, the head is there. And I remember myself when I left Iran and I saw all these Iranian people with beard. When I come to a position to Gaza, I saw all the Palestinians with beard.
Modern means of communication, such as television and internet, allow Islamist movements from al-Qaeda to Hamas to broadcast their propaganda. Intended to awaken the desire of revenge, Hamas plays on the humiliation felt by Muslims. It pushes more and more young Palestinians into the arms of Hamas, who are ready to sacrifice themselves and become, in turn, martyrs.
Une nouvelle génération de Palestiniens, de jeunes Arabes, vous savez, la majorité des populations de cette région a moins de 15-16 ans, et eux arrivent et ils découvrent que leur avenir est bouché en l'absence d'un accord, en l'absence d'un véritable développement économique et social, et ce sont cette génération-là, ces jeunes-là, qui risquent effectivement de déclencher une nouvelle forme de combat.
The use of religious extremes on one side as on the other feeds the clash of civilizations and eventually causes the failure of all treaties and peace agreements. The day after the signing of the Oslo Accords between the Palestinian administration and the Hebrew government in Jerusalem, the Israeli nationalist and religious right is on the streets. Two years later, on November the 4th, 1995, after a speech in favor of peace, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, signer of the Oslo Peace Treaty, is murdered by a Jewish extremist. Yasser Arafat cannot attend the funeral. Soon, he will be no more than a secluded prisoner in his government headquarters in Ramallah. The extremist Yigal Amir is sentenced to life imprisonment for the assassination of Rabin, but nothing is said of his sponsors.
Tout cela n'a pas été examiné, n'a pas fait l'objet d'enquête, de même que les rabbins qui auraient pu donner leur bénédiction à Yigal Amir pour qu'il aille assassiner un Premier ministre, ces rabbins n'ont pas fait l'objet de poursuites, d'enquêtes. Pour ma part, Rabin a été liquidé parce qu'il agissait contre la vision nationaliste religieuse de toute une partie de cette population.
The theses of the nationalist right are gaining ground. The eternal disagreement point, the status of Jerusalem. During his election campaign, Ariel Sharon, future Israeli Prime Minister, goes on September the 28th, 2000, on the esplanade of the mosques, the sacred place for which Jews and Muslims fight.
I came here with a message of peace. I believe that we can live together with the Palestinians. I came here to the holiest place of the Jewish people in order to see what happens here and really to have the feeling.
C'est une politique qui est avant tout une politique d'aveugles, de gens de dirigeants qui ne regardent pas où tout cela mène à long terme.
Ariel Sharon wins the elections, but at what cost? If the visit to the esplanade of the mosques seduced the Israeli religious right, who dream of rebuilding the temple there, it is perceived as a provocation by the Arab population. The next day, the Stone War breaks out anew. The second Intifada draws the country into a new round of violence. The attacks perpetrated in the name of God by Hamas are systematically followed by military operations in the Palestinian territories.
Aujourd'hui, ce qui se passe, c'est que la politique instrumentalise cette fonction symbolique de la religion et qu'elle se débarrasse au fond des référents transcendantaux et qu'on a des chocs frontaux énormes parce que justement, il n'y a même plus la sagesse que véhiculaient les religions habituellement sur la guerre. Je vous rappelle que tout le droit de la guerre est né d'une réflexion chrétienne, que le djihad, même en bon droit islamique, est limité. Nous sommes rentrés dans l'illimitation de l'affirmation identitaire. Absolutisation. Et c'est là où effectivement il y a eu un emploi, une instrumentalisation des caractères religieux, parce que ça marche mieux que tout le reste. Surtout quand on a découpé cette religion et qu'on l'a décontextualisée, qu'on l'a déshistoricisée, qu'on a annulé en elle tout ce qui n'était pas de l'ordre du commandement, de la loi, de l'absolu.
Zvi Lanzman, an Israeli army officer, leads one of the units in charge of control operations over the Palestinian population.
It was a very rough time. It wasn't a war, it was operations and it was shooting all the time, but it was dangerous and we'd go house to house and ask who's in the house and you know, like some kid opens the door. We ask him, where's your father? He says he's dead. Where's your brother? He's in prison. Where's your, don't you have any other brothers? They're also dead. Is there no other man in this house? No, you know. You go to the next house and, you know, everybody else is dead there too, you know. So it makes you think, you know, you're going around these boxes of cement, which, you know, it's clear that these people have nothing, and many of them are dead already, and you're fighting them.
Extremists on both sides have in the end the same goal: continue the conflict until one side or the other triumphs. That's a recipe for the Middle East continuing to be the epicenter of international terror for the future.
In the US, the Democrats lose the elections to George Bush Jr. In 2001, 20 years after the presidency of Ronald Reagan, the neoconservatives and the evangelist right are back in the White House. The third act of the New World Order can now begin.
فها هي أمريكا قد أصابها الله سبحانه وتعالى في مقتل من مقاتلها، فدمر أعظم مبانيها، فلله الحمد والمنة. وها هي أمريكا قد امتلأت رعبا من شمالها إلى جنوبها ومن شرقها إلى غربها، وما تذوقه أمريكا اليوم هو شيء يسير مما ذقناه منذ عشرات السنين.
Que dit Ben Laden? Quel message envoie-t-il à Bush à ce moment-là? Il lui dit qui a gagné la guerre d'Afghanistan? Qui a défait le monde soviétique? Est-ce que c'est votre monde libéral, fondé sur l'argent, ou est-ce que c'est moi en tant qu'héritier d'une révélation divine? De quel prix vous êtes prêt à payer votre victoire? Est-ce que vous avez des kamikazes? Est-ce que vous êtes capable de frapper l'univers entier par une foudre descendue du ciel? Vous voyez, on est en pleine représentation mythologique, c'est la bataille finale.
September the 11th, 2001. 11 years to the day from George Bush Sr.'s historical speech announcing the New World Order. This is the day that bin Laden chose to launch his final battle. A battle that he has been preparing since the victory of the Afghan Jihad against the Soviet Union. In 1989, he founds al-Qaeda and develops his concept of a global jihad. Its purpose, to build a great caliphate from Saudi Arabia to Pakistan. From the early 90s, al-Qaeda led a series of increasingly deadly attacks. While the West saw the events of September the 11th as the apocalypse, in the Middle East, many celebrate it as a revenge, not realizing to what extent it will also work against them.
Au moins dans les discours, Arafat n'avait absolument pas compris dans quelle mesure l'opinion publique internationale allait mettre dans le même sac les terroristes qui ont attaqué les tours jumelles de New York et le Palestinien qui se fait sauter dans un autobus à Tel Aviv ou Jérusalem et le militant du Fatah qui prend une Kalachnikov pour tirer sur des colons ou des soldats. Dans l'esprit de la population israélienne, tout ça était mis dans le même sac. Je crois que c'est un ancien patron du Mossad qui a dit que le 11 septembre était de ce point de vue-là pour la politique israélienne un véritable miracle. Israël était du bon côté.
This crusade, this war on terrorism, is going to take a while. And the American people must be patient. I'm going to be patient. But I can assure the American people, I am determined. I'm not going to be distracted.
The Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. I will obey the orders of the President of the United States. So help me God.
In October 2001, George Bush launches his new crusade invading Afghanistan and names it the Global War Against Terror.
The events of 9/11 converted him into a full-throated Wilsonian, somebody who came to believe passionately that we were called upon to spread freedom and democracy around the world, and therefore was going to undertake this global war on terror to achieve that. He really believed it, and I think he really believes to this very day that he was called upon to do this mission.
The official purpose of the invasion, to rid the country of the Taliban, destroy al-Qaeda, and capture bin Laden, dead or alive.
We could have destroyed al-Qaeda then. Instead, America's attention wandered away to a different battlefield, to Mesopotamia and to Iraq. And al-Qaeda was given the breathing space, and the Taliban was given the breathing space to recover.
The United States turn away from Afghanistan and decide to invade Iraq, officially to rid the country of Saddam Hussein and his weapons of mass destruction, to conduct the war on terrorism and hunt down al-Qaeda, and to restore democracy. The Third Gulf War begins.
The transition from dictatorship to democracy will take time, but it is worth every effort. Our coalition will stay until our work is done, and then we will leave, and we will leave behind a free Iraq.
Despite the disapproval of the United Nations and a large part of the West, the US administration sends 50,000 militaries to occupy Iraq. Andrew Basovich Jr., a career military as his father, is also sent to the front.
Our son was killed in Iraq in 2007, and that's the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. That said, I didn't try to talk him out of serving, and I believe that serving one's country is an honorable thing to do. And I also believe that soldiers don't choose, and they don't get to choose, the circumstances of their service.
But after 2 years of war, everything changes. The US military intervention determines the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, but does not find weapons of mass destruction. America cannot stop terrorism or eliminate bin Laden. On the contrary, al-Qaeda takes advantage of the war to settle in Iraq and expand its range.
Over time, we're coming to understand how wrong this was, how stupid it was what we were doing, because we weren't really doing anything other than trying to survive and hurting people in the process. But then really kind of getting the sense that all of the things that we had been told about what this was all about, were lies.
Bush's global war on terror was ill-advised from the outset. That the Iraq war was unnecessary and mismanaged.
In 7 years of war, estimations are of at least 100,000 Iraqi deaths, out of which 60% are Iraqi civilians, killed by the forces of intervention. We must add to that the systematic use of torture, even more outrageous, since it is done by a country professing democratic values.
It was an invasion, and it is an occupation. I mean, we continue to insist that governments in the Islamic world cannot be allowed to sort out their own affairs. We continue to insist that we have an important role to play, a military role to play, an advisory role to play. I mean, in old days, we would have called it imperialism.
30 years of war in the Middle East, and the 3 Gulf Wars, the Iran-Iraq War, then the war in Kuwait, and finally the invasion of Iraq, have participated in the policy of remodeling what neoconservative Americans call the Great Middle East. By occupying Iraq and also Afghanistan, America has increased its military presence, its hold on the region, and its oil reserves. 25 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, these wars led from both sides in the name of God have erected new walls. The two worlds are turning their backs on each other. At the Israeli border, the Islamist movements are reinforced. Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon whose chief Nasrallah claims loudly and strongly the pure and simple disappearance of Israel. These threats are not taken lightly in Israel, especially since only 2 years earlier, in July 2006, Hezbollah won its first major war victory. It has managed to repel an offensive of the powerful Israeli army.
الامريكان بشكل عام هن الاساس، يعني لو مثلا اسرائيل، امريكا هي اللي بتجسد اسرائيل وكل شيء، هي بتدعمه ان كان بالسلاح، ان كان بالاجتماع، بالاقتصاد، باي مرحله هي بتدعمه امريكا. امريكا مثل ما بيقولوا راس الافعى.
Ready to commit acts of suicide, these fighters are still considered in the West as terrorists. But since their victory over Israel, they act under the supervision of Lebanon's official army. To speak, they must appear with their faces covered, but the Hezbollah hierarchy forbids them to express themselves.
نحن أول شيء بنحارب بشكل عام لننصر الدين الإسلامي، ورب العالمين ما بيحب الظلم، هاي أول شغلة.
Iran actively supports the Islamist movements that directly threaten Israel and Western interests. Iran, where President Ahmadinejad wants to stand up to US hegemony, wants to become the superpower of the region and therefore gain access to nuclear energy.
هم بهانه تأسیس رژیم صهیونیستی یک دروغ و یک فساد است. یک دروغ متکی به یک ادعای غیر قابل استناد و ادعای افسانه‌ای مقابله با این رژیم، ایستادن در برابر صهیونیست ها هم یک امر ملی است، هم یک امر اعتقادی و دینی و اسلامی است. ورحمة الله وبركاته.
This man has got dreams. And again, the dreams come from the clerical establishment, from the people in power. But he says it, very frankly, and without any sophistication. He has got a dream, the dream, to become dominant over the whole region and perhaps to provide happiness for the whole world.
Faced with this direct threat, the noose tightens. In Washington, within AIPAC, the powerful pro-Israel lobby, whose mission is to put pressure on Congress, the war against Iran is openly declared. For the American neoconservatives, Ahmadinejad becomes the new enemy to defeat.
We must not allow this Iranian theocracy to develop a nuclear weapon. It's not enough to be determined. We have to say, without any hesitation, it will not happen. All options must be on the table. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
I know that there are lunatics, maybe here in America, lunatics in Israel and some other places, I don't know, who might dream of some sort of invasion, but that is lethal. That is fatal, that is poisonous, that is something which, destroys all hopes for democracy in Iran and wherever it is.
A US military intervention against Iran could give Ahmadinejad the legitimacy he seeks and threaten the Middle East with a new Gulf War. The hateful statements of the Iranian president aroused civil society. When he loses the elections in June 2009, he refuses to concede his defeat and orders violent repressions. Hundreds die and thousands imprisoned. The images taken with cell phones by demonstrators and distributed worldwide create international solidarity but do not prevent Islamic power from stifling the Green Revolution in blood.
Si on va vers une guerre à consonance religieuse ici, cela ne s'arrêtera pas aux frontières du Proche-Orient, cela arrivera également jusqu'aux communautés musulmanes, juives, évangélistes en Europe et aux États-Unis.
America becomes aware of President Bush's repeated lies to justify his actions in Iraq and the Middle East. In late 2008, the Republicans lose power. Obama's election brings new hopes, but the war in Iraq bogs down. Afghanistan is occupied, al-Qaeda is still terrorizing, Iran continues to threaten. 6 months after his accession to power, Obama travels to Egypt and gives a historical speech in which he breaks clearly with the bellicose messianism of his predecessor.
Assalamu alaikum. I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world, one based on mutual interest and mutual respect, and one based upon the truth that America and Islam are not exclusive and need not be in competition. Instead, they overlap and share common principles, principles of justice and progress, tolerance, and the dignity of all human beings.
History accelerates. Arab countries rise one after the other against dictators long supported by the West. Tunisia, Egypt, Bahrain, Yemen, Syria. Crowds fill the streets and suffer repression. They demand the departure of the dictators, not in the name of God, but in the name of democracy. The West discovers a modern Arab civil society, turned more towards new technologies than towards religion. A page in the history of the Middle East is turning. The end of a 30-year cycle, marked also by the death of bin Laden. The operation is followed live from the White House by President Obama. A US Army helicopter commando enters at night in Pakistan, infiltrates bin Laden's house, and kills him.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. It was nearly 10 years ago that a bright September day was darkened by the worst attack on the American people in our history.
In Israel, the clash between the Jewish and Muslim communities continues. If Israel still fears the intentions of certain Islamic parties who claim the annihilation of their country in Jerusalem, the Palestinians continue to be expelled from the Arab sector of the city. Jewish families settle in their place and occupy their homes. These evictions are part of a plan of unification and Judaization of Jerusalem by 2020. The two-state solution, an Israeli state and a Palestinian state, seems the most viable. But it cannot prevail.
This conflict is fueling al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, and extremists in Israel, all of whom want only victory and the destruction of their enemy. That route is a route that will make international terrorism continue to dominate our headlines for decades to come.
I'm in a situation where I don't know what to do. And nobody knows, you know. It's voices, voices, voices everywhere. Everyone's so right and so sure of themselves, and everything's so clear to everybody. I go to the Combatants for Peace, they say, how can you go to the army? How can you do that? How can you, it's a crime against humanity to go and conquer other people. How can you do that? And then I go and talk to friends of mine, and they say, how can you even think of not going to the army? Who's going to protect us? You want other people to die for you? You know what would happen here if there wasn't an army? You think they'd be shaking your hand?